We have joining us online Dr. Richard Stallman. Richard, can you hear us?
Dr. Richard Stallman. Richard, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I think there's a slight delay in the signal reaching across the ocean, but that's okay. The quality is fantastic. So just a brief introduction. Dr. Stallman is another returning speaker. So we're very pleased that he's with us again. And he is the founder of the free software movement. And he's been doing free software for decades. And we're very excited to hear from him again. So he'll be talking about mass surveillance. So Richard, over to you. And we'll give you a signal on the chat when we run down on time.
I have a clock here. In any case, I'm going to, first I better warn you that my computer could crash. Somehow its CPU speed limiter is ineffective at the moment, and I've got warnings that the CPU is heated up. So I have a fan blowing at the computer, which is lifted off the desk, and maybe that will keep it running long enough to finish this talk. If not, I guess I'll restart without the camera. So, people are starting to recognize now that massive surveillance fundamentally threatens a free society. Mass surveillance is rapidly getting worse. Fortunately for us, we have an example in China showing how bad it can get. We now speak of Chinification when we talk about the development of systems that do massive surveillance. That doesn't mean we have been able to stop them yet, but the efforts to stop them are actually taking off just a little bit. For instance, in the city I live in, Cambridge, Massachusetts, there was an anti-surveillance ordinance which applies to city government agencies. It has a very sad weakness. One agency has been given effectively the permission to ignore this ordinance by saying there is an exigent need. And when it says there's an exigent need, it can do basically as much surveillance as it wants and not consult the city council until the, quote, exigent need, unquote, is over. Can you guess which agency that is? The most dangerous agency. The police department, the last one you'd ever want to trust with surveillance. But still, it's a step. And the San Francisco face recognition ordinance doesn't have an exception for anyone. But it's weak still in the sense that it only applies to government agencies. And not enough, because there are companies now, such as Amazon, which are organizing to recognize faces from potentially millions of cameras and collect the data, and who knows what it might do with that data. So clearly we need to go beyond stopping government agencies, especially not just city agencies, from doing face recognition. And this will lead into the general conclusion that I've been advocating for years, which is we need to prohibit the deployment of systems that systematically surveil people. We must have laws requiring all systems to keep surveillance within a tolerable level where it is not massive. So the first digital surveillance people were generally subject to was software. Can make that show up. We'll use my slides. Where's that? I wanted to use my slides, however, that particular control is not working right now. Don't know why. Can I change it here? Okay. So, you should be seeing my slides. So the first thing to realize about free software is it refers to freedom, not price, because freedom is important and price is a minor detail. So a computer executes instructions that it gets from a program, and these instructions determine what it does. So the question is, who gives the instructions to your computer? Most people think they're giving the instructions, but really it's someone else. People think that their computers are obeying them, but really the computer is always obeying its true master, and it does what you tell it. Gee, I think, are we disconnected?
No, we can hear you. I mean, there is a delay.
I don't hear you. I think you're out. Okay, good. Good, because the indication you were present has dropped. Anyway, a computer running non-free software always obeys its true master, which is the company that made the software. With any program, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program or the program controls the users. When the users control the program, that's free software because it respects users' freedom and community. The only way users can have a program that respects their freedom and community is when the users have control over it so that they can make it behave the way they want it to, not some other way. In order for the users to have this control, they need the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is to run the program any way you wish for any purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code so you can change it and change the source code and thus make the program behave the way you want it to and do your computing activity the way you want it to. These two freedoms together give the users separate control. That means I control my copies, you control your copies, and thus each of us can make the program do what that one of us wants it to do. But separate control is not enough because most users are not programmers. They don't know how to study and change the source code, but they still deserve control over their computing. The way they can get this is through collective control, which is the freedom to join with other users to work together to make that program do what the group decides to make it do. This requires 2 more. Well, and this is the way that a non-programmer can participate in the control. The 2 users on the right, they are changing the code. They're programmers, I guess. The one on the left, directly changing the code. But they all decide together what changes to make. And this way, a non-programmer gets input into what that program's going to do. This is the only way known for non-programmers to have a say in the behavior of the program. So those who work together this way are those who choose to. For whatever reason, some people might not want to work with some other people, and then they don't. But those who want to work together must be free to do so. And that requires two more essential freedoms. There's the freedom to make exact copies and distribute them to others when you wish. That's freedom 2. And there's the freedom to make copies of your modified version and give or sell them to others when you wish. That's freedom 3. With these freedoms, a group is free to cooperate. You see, when one user makes a modified version, one member of the group, with freedom 3, person can make copies and distribute them to others in the group. Then they, under freedom 2, are free to make more copies of that version and give or sell them to others in the group, and so on until everybody who wants it gets it, everybody that the group is cooperating with. But there's no limit on who they can cooperate with. The group doesn't have to have an official existence or a list of members. It's just whoever's cooperating today. So any of those users can offer copies to the general public, which means publishing that version. So if the program carries the 4 essential freedoms, it's free software, because those freedoms give the users control. But if one of those freedoms is missing or incomplete, then the users don't control the program. Instead, the program controls the users and the owner controls the program. So this program subjugates its users under the unjust power of its owner. This is why every non-free program is an injustice. To end this injustice means ending non-free software. And that is the ultimate goal of the free software movement. Of course, we're not close to that goal yet, but we have created a free world where we have pushed out the non-free software. I don't tolerate any non-free software installed on my computer, not even JavaScript code coming from websites. I have escaped from non-free software. And that is the first goal. We passed the first goal quite a long time ago. And we're moving on subsequent goals of freedom. However, if the subjugating the user, the fact that the owner controls the users, is only the basic injustice of non-free software, it generally leads to other injustices, malicious functionalities, because the owner decides what goes in the program, and the owner knows it has power over the users. So it feels the temptation, or the human workers in the company feel the temptation to take advantage of their power to mistreat users. There are many kinds of malicious functionalities. The most basic one is surveillance of the users. It's normal nowadays for non-free programs to spy on their users. This ought to convince you to speed up your escape from non-free software. It's almost certainly spying on you if you allow it into your life. All the usual non-free operating systems, I mean Windows, macOS, Android, iOS, and Chromos, they all spy on their users, each in its own way, sending data to the manufacturer. And many of them require some kind of account or subscription, in effect, which enables more surveillance. Android, for instance, often comes with pre-installed apps that spy, and Android itself spies. If you want to find more information about the details of this, look at GNU.org, /malware / proprietary surveillance.html. Lots of examples. The nastiest examples of surveillance are in apps that require users to identify themselves. Of course, sometimes the usual proprietary operating systems also require users to identify themselves to make an account. But consider, for instance, Spotify. To use Spotify, the user has to make an account and pay, which is hard to do anonymously. And therefore, Spotify knows who the person is and knows what the person listens to. Well, this is very dangerous surveillance. And then Netflix is the same. So even if I were willing to tolerate non-free software sometimes, I'd never tolerate that, because I refuse to ever let a company know what I'm watching or listening to or reading. And this is why I wear a button that says, "Don't be tracked, pay cash," because I always pay cash. I never identify myself to pay for the things I read, watch, or listen to, or anything else, or anything I buy in my daily life. I go to a physical store and I pay cash and I take it away. Now, transportation systems are starting to identify people. It's a dangerous trend. Consider, for instance, Uber and Lyft and their competitors. It really doesn't matter what the company is, only how it treats people. An ordinary taxi you can use anonymously, and you could pay anonymously with cash. But Uber and Lyft don't allow that. Because Uber is running at a loss, it loses billions of dollars every year. This is its plan to charge anti-competitive prices, destroy other options, and then Uber hopes we will be stuck and we will be forced to let Uber spy on us. Well, because of this, we need to recognize Uber as not merely harmful and nasty, but our enemy. It is actively fighting against our anonymity. And the least we can do is absolutely refuse to get into an Uber car. I tell my friends, I won't go with you in an Uber car. No, I appreciate that you wish to help, but I'm not going to get into an Uber car to get a ride home, because Uber is our enemy. And Lyft also is our enemy. It really makes no difference which one wins, or even if we have the choice. A choice between being oppressed through path A or oppressed through path B is not really, doesn't make things much better. This is also, by the way, why having a choice between proprietary programs doesn't make it any better. Being able to choose your master. But freedom is not having a master. A thing that they frequently do nowadays is they design even physical products for your home, so that in order to tell them what to do, you communicate with them over the internet through the manufacturer's server. Many kinds of products are designed this way, and that means they spy on people. For instance, camera control adapters, cooking devices, thermostats, light bulbs, security cameras, sex toys have all been designed so that people control them by talking through the manufacturer's server. By the way, the so-called smart light bulbs that you can turn on with a controller, if that connects to the internet, then the manufacturer is spying on when they go on and off. And not only that, but Google makes a home controller that can give commands to other devices. But uh, Google has started making a demand. Any manufacturer that wants its devices to be controllable by the Google controller has to agree to tell Google all the commands sent to the device. Of course, if the command is sent through the Google Home controller, then Google spies on that directly. But Google wasn't satisfied with that. It demanded to be told by the device manufacturer every time that device gets told what to do in some other way. So they're grasping for more spying on people. And there's another nasty thing about that design, and that is to control the device, you need to have an account on the server, and they can block your account so that you can't control the device. They can even turn off the server whenever the server's activity is not bringing in enough money to make it worth continuing. The manufacturer can just switch off that server, and then all the devices get essentially bricked or partly bricked, and tough on you. Well, I won't go into the other kinds of malicious functionalities. DRM is when the device is designed intentionally to restrict you. There are also backdoors like erasing books in the Amazon swindle. There is censorship of apps. Apple is compelled to censor on behalf of China because Apple itself the power to censor apps in the iPhone. And then China had the idea of ordering Apple to block all VPNs. And Apple discovered it had to obey. There are even universal backdoors. Microsoft Windows has a universal backdoor, although they prefer to call it by a nice sounding name, Auto Upgrade. Well, this is as far as I'll go with these points because this is not the main topic. But if you don't want to be spied on, you need to reject the non-free software that's almost surely going to spy on you. But that's not enough. There are lots of other ways that surveillance is done. And it all adds up. Let's consider that this box represents the sum total of all the surveillance data. It's not collected all together. It's collected as various separate databases by various different companies and by other systems which are set up by the state. But this data gets made available to data brokers. The data brokers may get it without people's names, addresses, and unique ID numbers, but they can figure out who the records belong to. And when they figure out the two records belong to the same person, they put those records together. So it effectively adds up to one big pile of surveillance data. And then governments do the same thing. In the US, the FBI has almost total surveillance power. It can collect any database of personal data with a few specific exceptions just by demanding it secretly. It's illegal even to tell anybody that the FBI seized the database from you. And and the FBI doesn't have to get a court order to do it. So the FBI gets all these databases with the names, and it immediately converts them into one big cross-linked pile of surveillance data. And well, there are people talking about trying to apply antitrust law to massive surveillance. They think if we break up these companies into separate parts, like this, for instance, then maybe it would be less harmful. Well, I don't think so, because when each of those databases gets to a data broker, the data brokers will figure out who's who and put it back, stitch it back together into one seamless pile of surveillance data, and the FBI will get them all and convert that into one seamless web of surveillance data, and it'll be the same repressive effect. This approach won't do the job. The other approach people like to talk about is the idea that you should own the data about you, which means that companies that make money from the data will perhaps pay you something, or maybe not. You see, if there's a service that people are pressured by their communities to use, or if life is set up such that it's hard to get by without using a certain service, or should I say a certain disservice, and this has terms and conditions where you say, oh, I consent to be surveilled and I accept the provision of the service as paying me for the data, they'll all go ahead doing exactly what they've done. I've read that Google has dealt with the GDPR by just getting the sites that show Google advertising to include in their own terms of and conditions that the users agree to Google's surveillance. Google has thus solved the problem of consent. It doesn't have to bother talking to those people and asking them one by one for consent. I refer to this as the manufacture of consent, borrowing a phrase that was used in a different though related context, a political context also. The point is the manufacture of consent is so easy, and the manufacture of consent not to be paid in cash will be so, not to be paid with money will be so easy for the same reasons, that those don't change anything. They don't fix anything. So what do we need to do? Well, what are the other systems? I'm going to disconnect this. Do you see me now?
Hi, Richard.
You there?
We see you and we hear you. Yes.
Hi, Richard. We see you and we hear you.
Okay, good. So, what are some of these other systems that surveil people? Well, payment systems are a big part of it. That's why we need to refuse to do digital payment. That's why I don't use my credit card to buy anything other than airline tickets. And I make that exception because they demand to see my ID card anyway, so which for domestic flights they shouldn't do. But they do. And since paying cash wouldn't get me any anonymity, I'll use the credit card for that. For anything else, well, if I rented a car, I would also use a credit card. They would demand to see my driver's license after all. I wouldn't have any anonymity renting a car. But the point is, for everything else, I insist on anonymity. I won't say who I am. And you should do the same thing. Switzerland had a very nice system where people could buy a train pass for, often it would be a year, and they would pay, they'd get a card, and when there was a control, you would just show the controller your card to say, and the controller would see you have a pass. which means everything's okay. You've paid. It used to work that way, but then they replaced it with a surveillance system where the passenger has to let the card get red when getting onto a vehicle and let it get red again when getting off. Well, that's an injustice. Switzerland should go back to the old system, which respected people's anonymity. We see, and then there are systems that track people's movements in cars by looking at the cameras that look at the license plates. This used to be done mainly by governments, but now in the US, there's a company which has large numbers of cameras in many areas and tracks the cars. Well, this should be forbidden. Of course, we have to allow people to take a photo of a car's license plate occasionally. But to set up a system which systematically tracks cars through their license plates should be a crime, meaning that the executives and the others involved in setting it up are prosecuted for doing this. And we have to take surveillance seriously as a threat to a free society, and that means acting firmly. And there are now systems being set up to do the same thing with face recognition. Amazon is doing it through video doorbells. So they get person A to install a face recognition camera looking at the street nearby, and then they convince person A it would be nice to transmit that video to Amazon so Amazon can identify the people and tell person A. But Amazon can tell others as well. This sort of system also should be forbidden. But if you have a camera that sends a video feed anywhere else, well, face recognition could be done there. The thug departments, I'm talking about the uniformed thugs that carry guns in most countries and can shoot you and then lie about why. Well, they, in some U.S. cities, persuade businesses to set up video cameras that send a feed all the time, which the thug department can record. And, well, they can do face recognition on that as well. I'm sure they're starting to. This has to be forbidden. It has to be a crime to set up such a system. It has to be a crime to set up a system where the trains track who their passengers are. Then, of course, there are the systems that track the beacons on people's phones as they move around. And then there's the phone system itself, which tracks people's movements. This is why I don't have a portable phone. A portable phone will track, if you have one, it will track your movements, and it can be remotely converted into a listening device, because in the modem processor, which runs only non-free software, that software has a universal back door. So it can be changed remotely. And one thing they do is change it into a full-time listening device, which listens and transmits all the conversations nearby. And if you try to turn it off, once it's been modified this way, it doesn't really turn off. It pretends to turn off. It makes the screen look like the usual turning off sequence, but it keeps running all the time, listening and transmitting. You put these two things together, and what it amounts to is Stalin's Dream. That's what I call that device. I believe it is my duty as a citizen not to participate in such a system, and that's why I don't have a mobile phone. I refuse to carry a mobile phone. So we have so many different systems being designed to participate in massive surveillance. And why is that? Because that's the way to do things. That's the current standard practice. Collect all possible data about people because it's going to be useful somehow for something or other, they say. So why not? We have to change the way that is thought about. We have to say, why not? Because we deserve privacy, and privacy nowadays means anonymity. I've seen the term ambient privacy used to mean that nobody's tracking you. And this again goes counter to the usual discourse about how to remedy the problems caused by massive surveillance. They talk about, quote, data protection, unquote, but that's too weak. It starts too late in the in the sequence of events. And it won't work anyway. Once a database of personal data is collected, it will be misused. These data can be misused by the organization that collects them. They're straining against all limits on them to find loopholes so they can abuse this data. But even when the organization doesn't do it, rogue employees can do it. Now, they're disobeying orders. They could get fired. It might even be a crime, but they do it. And not only that, the organization could leak the data by accident. That happens pretty often. It's not an unlikely possibility. And then somebody can get that data and abuse it. Or thieves, crackers can break the security and get that data and abuse it. Please don't call those people hackers. Hacking means playful cleverness. I'm a hacker. I'm not a cracker. Please make the distinction to be kind to us hackers. Anyway, in addition, the state can take that database, like the FBI in the US and in other countries, there are similar arrangements. Data protection laws have basically come to exclude the state from their coverage. And of course, the state is the most dangerous entity of all to be allowed to have massive surveillance of people, because the state wants to imprison whistleblowers. But democracy depends on whistleblowers. If we can't find out what the state does, if we can't find out about the state's crimes, how are we going to stop them? We can't tell the state what to do if the state conceals that from us. And in addition, dissidents are often persecuted. If dissidents can't keep their activities private from the state, then they're in danger and they're likely to be intimidated too. Of course, occasionally, some people have the courage to disregard that. Hong Kong has shown us an example of courage. But look how far things have to go to get enough people ready to do that they can do it in safety. And Sudan showed us that they may get killed even today. So what we need to do is make sure there is no database to be misused. And the way we do that is, instead of talking about protecting the data once it's collected, talk about how to stop it from being collected. Now, I have a bunch of practical and technical ideas for how to do this. In other words, we don't have to have one universal solution. We can have many partial solutions that add up to enough. Decades ago, stores and offices would put up security cameras. A security camera would make a recording locally, and if there was a crime, people would go and look at the recording, and otherwise it would be automatically overwritten. You could imagine perhaps in a Stalinist repressive state that agents would go around and copy every recording physically in the 2 weeks before it got erased. But I don't know if they could even afford that. And a country that isn't tremendously repressive certainly can't afford to pay people to do that. So that those cameras were not a surveillance threat. They didn't permit massive surveillance. They did contribute to security against crime. Well, so they were doing good and no harm. Fine. Let's have those. I say, let's permit security cameras and forbid surveillance cameras. It's a surveillance camera if the video can go anywhere else without someone's coming there to look at it. That's the criterion. Because if the video is only local, using those videos for massive surveillance is not practical. But if the videos go over any kind of network to anywhere else, then it makes massive surveillance through those cameras feasible. And therefore, they're so dangerous, we must not allow them. So forget about data protection. Let's look at surveillance prevention. Whatever other goal we want to achieve, if it's important enough, let's first look for a way to achieve it without contributing to massive surveillance, or then look for a trade-off. Can you achieve some of that goal without contributing to massive surveillance? I'm sure whatever legitimate goals there might be for keeping track of passengers on the Swiss railroads, they can get enough data to do a reasonably good job of those goals without tracking individuals. And that's what they should do. They should set up systems so that they get some useful data for innocent purposes, but without collecting so much data that it becomes a threat. This has to be the crucial criterion for every decision about collecting data about people. We must not collect so much data it becomes a threat. So at this point, I'd like to say that if you appreciate the free software cause, please work for the cause. Take a look at gnu.org/help to see a list of dozens of different kinds of jobs we need. One of those jobs is software development. Another of those jobs is writing better free documentation. And the other jobs are not about anything like that. This is a political movement which is campaigning, and we need lots of kinds of help. There will be something that you can do. So now, how about questions?
Yes, Richard, that's fantastic. I can listen to you talk for hours and hours. I mean, it's captivating and it's very interesting, relevant material. We're going to open the floor to questions, and immediately I see a hand at the back. If we can give that man a microphone.
Hello, Richard. Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
I have a suggestion.
Hi.
Just a second, please. Keep the microphone in one place. Have people come and make a queue to ask questions. It will save time, save the delays transporting the microphone around the room. Okay, now, Mr., please ask your question.
Yes, we have the first person ready to ask the question.
Should I bring the microphone here?
Yeah, come on stage.
Okay, so I have one question and one suggestion. And the first suggestion is in the event that we cannot stop the massive surveillance in the public. Oops, did we lose him?
Keep talking, keep talking.
Okay, so I've seen a video where someone put a bunch of drawings on their face, squares, triangles, and that completely threw off the AI. So if we start a movement where everybody's painting their face differently every day, that's one way you could actually protect against mass surveillance. But for that, you need to have enough people doing it. I don't know if it will come to that, but it's a suggestion. Maybe someone will start a movement.
Can you be brief?
I'm sorry?
Please be brief.
Okay. So
that was a good suggestion, but please be brief.
Sure. So the question is very brief. I love the movement for free software. However, if we don't have free hardware to run it on that we can actually trust, I don't think the free software is as powerful. So for Free Software Foundation probably needs to also move into the free hardware foundation, free hardware efforts where we...
Actually, it doesn't make sense to do that. You don't there's a thing you don't understand, which is that if the chips are made in a factory, we can't make modified chips, even if we have a free design for the chips. So to have the benefits of free hardware designs, we need to be able to fabricate the chips ourselves.
Right.
And that won't... Not on today's technology, we can't do that. Someday in the future, we will be able to do that.
Okay, well, that was my question. What do you know about how can we take it there? So, okay, thank you.
Take a look at gnu.org/philosophy/freehardwaredesigns.html. And with regard to how to stop data collection about individuals, how to design systems not to be massive surveillance, look at gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance-democracy.html.
Okay,
Over.
we have another question.
Hi, Richard. Thanks again for the presentation. I'm gonna play the 5-year-old kid and ask you that. What is your answer? Why these bad people are doing this and are abusing our privacy and want to get so deep in our life? What is your explanation of that?
Well, first of all, I don't necessarily know, and I don't actually need to know, because I see the danger and I want to prevent it. I don't have to know the motive in order to stop it, because I'm proposing a combination of laws and technology as the method to stop it. We see which systems must not be allowed to exist. This still leaves us the challenge of how to win political support so we can pass the laws to forbid those systems. But I don't have to know why they're making those systems. I know something about the reason. The book about surveillance capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff explains how profitable it is to track people. That's one of the motives. That's clearly the main motive of the businesses that are doing this surveillance. I suppose that governments that are doing surveillance have a different reason. It's not to profit from surveillance, but to clamp down on people.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to hand over the microphone to the next person of the audience, who's right here.
Hi, first thanks for the great presentation. I have a question, I have the following question. Let's say we have a person A which wants to get into the free software movement. How would you recommend to what would be your approach towards handling the inconveniences that come with using free software?
Well, first of all, you're mixing up two things. One is using free software, and the other is getting into the free software movement. These are two different things that you would do for two different reasons. The reason you stop running non-free software is to be free. And what motivates you to do it is that you hate being subjugated, hate being monitored and controlled, and hate being restricted by DRM, and that you hate the fact that the software owner has power over you. When you hate this enough, you'll say, give me that inconvenience so I can have freedom with it. When I get invited to run a non-free program, I don't think, oh, I want that convenience. I can't, what a sacrifice it is to say no. It's the opposite. I say, what do you mean, sacrifice my freedom to get that little convenience? I can live without that.
I see.
But getting into the free software movement is a different thing. That means working for the cause. So not just using free software, but if you're a programmer, you should develop important, useful free software, look at what we need, and then use your abilities of whatever kind to help us get there. In GNU.org/help, you can see the jobs that are not programming, other kinds. So if your talents are not programming, but you have other talents, well, you can use those. There are all sorts of ways to advance the cause. The important thing is to remember it's a fight for freedom, and it takes work. Just using free software, while it's what you should do for your own freedom's sake, it is not fighting for our cause.
I see. Thanks for the answer.
Thank you. So I think that was the last question we had. Before we let you go, Richard, I have a question, and it's about...
There's 10 more minutes. Okay.
Yeah, it's about Bitcoin and blockchain. Specifically, do you see Bitcoin playing any significant role within the free software movement? Is Bitcoin a form of a liberator, or is it just another surveillance mechanism that's going to be put on people? And more
Let me
broadly,
answer. First of all, Bitcoin is implemented by free software, so it's part of the free software community. Whether Bitcoin is an instrument of liberation through its functionality is a different question. The reason I don't use Bitcoin, well, there were two reasons. One is it doesn't give you anonymity. Every transaction is logged, and if they figure out who the wallet belongs to, then they know everything you're doing. We want better anonymity than that. Strong anonymity means if you do two transactions, it's impossible to tell that they were done by the same person. We have, well, the other disadvantage of Bitcoin is it's a currency, which is not what I want. I don't want to hold Bitcoin. I don't want to speculate. I don't do speculative investment. I don't have the temperament for that. I expect I'd lose money if I did it. And this brings with it various other practical inconveniences, and we don't know how those will work out. We have developed an anonymous payment system called GNU Taler. That's T-A-L-E-R. Look at taler.net. It's not a currency, it's a payment system. The payments will be denominated, well, perhaps in dollars or euros or whatever. And they're anonymous for the payer, but they are not anonymous for the payee. The payee is always identified, which means that GNU Taler does not facilitate tax evasion. and this is very important because tax evasion, principally by the rich, is a tremendous harm to society. It starves governments of the money they need to do things for the public. And therefore, we have to put an end to that tax evasion. Now, mostly it's done through legal loopholes, and digital systems are not the place to stop it. But still, with Bitcoin, it's easy to do transactions of millions of dollars. GNU Taler isn't designed to do that. It's designed to use the way you'd use a credit card to pay for things in stores or on the internet and make them anonymous. And they really are anonymous as long as the rest of the system doesn't give away your identity.
Fascinating. So I'll be having a look at this Taler, yeah, with a T, Taler.
Yes, that's the word that evolved into dollar with a D.
Okay, makes sense, makes sense. Okay, so do we have any more
systems
questions?
that support Taler payments, systems that support Taler payments are tolerable systems. The other systems are intolerable.
Makes sense. We have one more question.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for the talk. You said that organizations should use just enough data to support their operations. But how do you define enough data? And also, there's a lot of applications of data that can yield useful insights.
My definition is, it is the absolute minimum that would permit the general activity to be done. Meaning that if we had a non-computerized system that did the job without knowing who people are, then the system doesn't need to know who people are, therefore it should not be allowed to know who people are.
So that's an interesting criterion to apply when thinking about system design. How do you build it without digital, and that's the amount of data that you actually need, and figure out how to do that digital. Right?
Actually, that doesn't mean you have to build it without digital devices. It means that the digital system must not know who people are. In those cases where, for a bank account, maybe it needs to know who people are. But but for buying things in a store, there's no need for the store to know anything about the customer. Therefore, it must not be allowed to find out anything about the customer. All it should be allowed to get is a payment it can verify. With GNU Taler, it can get a payment and it has proof that that payment is valid. It just doesn't know anything about the payer.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, one more question.
Hello, Dr. Stallman. 2 years ago, you had a talk where you discussed the chatting system Signal, and you said briefly that there are a few problems with it. Can you elaborate more on that?
Well, the problem that I remember is somebody released a modified version of the client, which is supposedly released under a free license, and Signal made a legal threat and said, oh, well, this violates the terms of service on our server, so you're not allowed to release this. Now, it seems to me that the distributor had a response saying, no, by distributing this program, we're not doing anything on your server. A person using it might be violating your terms of service, but that's between you and him. That's a possible response. Whether it's legally adequate, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. In any case, to have made that threat was a very bad black mark against the developers. But I think that somehow that confrontation got resolved. I don't know exactly what happened.
Okay, thank you very much.
But it leaves me with a bad feeling about the developers of Signal.
Thank you, Richard. So I don't know if you have any.
By contrast, some people. Let me mention a comparable case. There's the case of Telegram. Telegram is a free program that you can use to talk to a particular server with encryption. And some people say that it's no good because they didn't release the server code. Well, I think that's a totally separate issue. If they release the server code, that would be useful free software. But you don't need to run a server to use that client. The client is free software, so people can check it to make sure it's honest. And I think that's enough to make the client code useful, and never mind whether the server's code is released. One thing to realize is, even if an organization releases the important software that runs on its server, it can never prove to you that that server isn't doing some other nasty thing. There could always be some script running on that server that does something that's not in the source code of the server software that's released. The fact is, you can never fully trust someone else's server to be doing only what it said, what they say someone says it's doing. You can see if it's doing that, but you can't see whether it's doing something else as well.
So thank you for those closing remarks. We're going to continue discussing the free software in our next session. We have a member of the Free Software Foundation Europe speaking next. So I want to give Richard a round of applause for joining us. It's been fantastic having you.
I should mention the Free Software Foundation and Free Software Foundation Europe are separate organizations. You can join one, you can join the other, you can join both, but they are totally separate organizations. That's something people should know.
Okay, thank you for that. I didn't know. That's interesting. So thank you, Richard. Enjoy the rest of your day, and Sophia is logging out now.